Good morning, everybody, or maybe even afternoon, where some of you are around Australia. So I'm Jarrah Bassal, Acting Head of Sustainability at Transurban, and I'll take you through a little bit of what decarbonisation means at Transurban. We're one of the world's largest toll road operators, and for us, getting your home safely and efficiently starts well before asset operations. It starts in that design and construction phase that we're talking about, that MECLA is focused on. So I'll jump to the next slide. So for us, transport emissions account for about 16% of global greenhouse gas emissions. That's the road, the freight, the passenger cars, the airlines, the rail. I think as a percentage of global emissions, it might even be up closer to 20% now. But road transport emissions actually account for 75% of all transport emissions. So this is before we even get into the embodied energy going into building those assets in our cities. And so as a leader in this space, we intrinsically understand our responsibility for leading this sector and leading this change. And we have our own internal greenhouse gas decarbonisation, but really we're now starting to focus beyond that. So what is our supply chain doing, and how can we influence the broader sector within Australia? That goes from driving out there in our vehicles, how we're transitioning to zero emissions vehicles, through to building zero emissions infrastructure, and then ultimately operating it in a zero emissions environment. The next stat along there is 80% of global greenhouse emissions come from cement. I sit on the cement working group with MECLA. MECLA has a variety of different working groups focused on hard to abate parts of the construction sector. How do we procure it? How do we shift industry? And it's a great working group for different forums to come together, from the supply chain all the way through to the designers and specifiers, clients and government, to really join those dots and stop people saying, oh, but you didn't ask for it. Oh, that product doesn't meet the engineering requirements, the safety requirements. So really that is that focus of MECLA. How do we unpack some of those challenges and all move forward in the way that we want to? And I think the other one that I want to mention is 27% stat that's up there. Key infrastructure in our cities already plays a major role in making our cities efficient, getting people from A to B, whether it's rail networks, public transport networks, or road networks. They are actually creating efficiencies in our city. But really what we're looking for now is a step change in the way of thinking. We're driving emissions reduction down through our projects, where at Transurban we're seeing about a 30% reduction in the embodied carbon in our projects just in the last 3 years. But to get to that next level, to get to 50%, to get to net zero, we actually need a step change in the way that we think. And that's part of the next journey for us at Transurban. I'll jump to the next slide. So for us, our targets. So we have targets validated by the SBTI, or the Science Based Targets Initiative. So as finance or investors, you might see these terminologies coming up. There's lots of different nuances around carbon neutral, net zero, scope 1, 2, 3. It's a bit of a minefield out there. So for us, we're aligned with SBTI, and our emissions targets are aligned with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. And that's across scope 1, 2, and 3. So internally, we've set a target to reduce our own fuel and electricity emissions by 50% by 2030. And I'm delighted to say that we're hoping to hit that target this financial year. We've nearly doubled in our energy consumption in the last year as part of a growing organisation, but in absolute terms, our emissions are now 13% below 2019 levels. And as we transition more and more towards renewable energy, this last year we're a little over 50%, and some of the wind farms we've got contracts with are now delivering us energy. So every single one of our assets now has a renewable energy source, and we're also working at the other end of that to reduce our own energy consumption and actually operate our assets more efficiently, because at the end of the day, if we can save power, we're also saving money. The one that we're focused on for MECLA is the third target down on that screen. So a 55% reduction in the carbon intensity of our major projects by 2030. In 2019, through the Infrastructure Sustainability Council rating tool, we could look at all the projects we've delivered to date, from their base case, their design phase, and their construction phase, and actually have a good carbon footprint of what went on. We know the amount of steel, concrete, asphalt that went into those projects, the fuel, the electricity. And based on that, we know in 2019, for every $1 million we spent on a major project, it resulted in 181 tonnes of embodied energy in that asset. Today, the last couple of projects that we've delivered, we're getting around 116 to 120 tonnes of carbon per million. Now, our goal is to get that below 80. So that's a huge step change. And that's one of the reasons that we engage with MECLA and participate in broader industry discussions is we know that we need to change the way that we specify projects, the way that engineers look at design requirements, government specifications. Safety is paramount. Having these assets stay for 80, 100 years plus is paramount because if we're having to redo the same asset every 5, 10 years, that's not efficient either. So it takes a lot of people around that table to agree on the priorities and how do we actually move forward as a sector. For us, as part of that 55% reduction pathway, we've got clear internal targets knowing what we need to do with cement, steel, and asphalt. They're our 3 key products. We don't know there's fuel and electricity. We've got ways that we can deal with fuel and electricity. The rest is on the materials. So I'll jump to the next slide. On the left, you can see our scope 1 and 2 emissions forecast and where we were last year in FY22 and where we're hoping to be this year. And then our challenge will be as we continue to grow as an organisation, how do we stay actually in line with that science-based reduction trajectory and then even overshoot it? How do we start to go below that 50% reduction by 2030? On the left-hand side, across our last 10 major projects, through focusing on those design and construction phases, we've actually reduced greenhouse gas emissions and embodied carbon by nearly 650,000 tonnes. That's materials reductions, it's using low carbon materials, changing the way we design and specify. But the challenge is, like I mentioned, how do we step again? And that's where I see the role that investors and finance sector can play is, we speak to cement manufacturers, we speak to steel manufacturers, they want to be shifting, they want to be transitioning. Some are doing it themselves, some are seeking finance, but ultimately we need to be sending clear signals that this is the direction that we want our economy to go. There's a lot about becoming a renewable energy powerhouse in Australia. How do we create green steel back on our shores? How do we bring steel manufacturing into Australia? There's, I think, one example of commercial green steel, that's steel made from renewable hydrogen happening in Germany at the moment with commercial scale, maybe 2026, I think. We can't build infrastructure at this scale without thinking about how we're going to create this pipeline in Australia. Because ultimately shipping it from overseas, again, coming back to that social license, we can create these industries in Australia off the back of this renewable energy transformation that's going to happen. So that's the challenge for us, is moving beyond materials reduction to actually different kinds of materials. So the challenge that I'd like to throw out there for the sector is how do you enable that capital that was being spoken about? How do you start asking the right questions and measuring the right things with your investment partners, with your asset partners? We have a lot of long-term investors in Transurban and a lot of investment partners, and we're seeing that real shift and maturing around ESG, the questions that are being asked, the knowledge. I don't think I go a single week right now without being asked a question from investors about what does Scope 3 mean? What are you doing about it? How are you engaging? And I welcome those discussions because every time we have those discussions, we get better, we improve as an industry. So I might leave it there and leave some time for panel and discussions, but thank you very much.